Sorry I'm late. I had to stop by the Wax Museum again and give the finger to FDR.
We know al-Qaeda, Zawahiri, is supporting the opposition in Syria. Are we supporting al-Qaeda in Syria?
Well, it's a proud day for America. And by God, we've kicked Vietnam syndrome once and for all. Thank you very, very much.
I say it, I say it again, you've been had. You've been took. You've been hoodwinked.
These witnesses are trying to simply deny things that just about everybody else accepts as fact.
He came, he saw, he died.
Well, we ain't killing their army, but we killing them. We be on CNN like, say our name, bitch, say it 3 times.
The meeting of the largest armies in the history of the world. Then there's going to be an invasion.
All right, you guys, introducing investigative journalist Rick Sterling. He's written this great new piece we're running at antiwar.com. Well, by the time you guys hear this, it'll be up there. It's called Taking the World to the Brink of Annihilation. Welcome back to the show. How's it going?
Yeah, hi, Scott.
All right, so, omnicide aside, that's Daniel Ellsberg has now coined that phrase for nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia. The end of the species. But short of that anyway, and we could get to that at the end if you want, to talk about, the real implication of the conflict between America and Russia here. But boy, you did a great job breaking down all kinds of different questions that I and my audience might have about the situation in Syria here. So first of all, can you talk about the alleged, I guess, I don't want to prejudice it, the alleged chemical weapons attack that took place Saturday in a town called, is it Douma in Syria?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, the bigger picture is that starting about 7 or 8 weeks ago, the Syrian government began a campaign to expel the armed factions which have controlled the district called East Ghouta, which is on the outskirts of Damascus. And East Ghouta is an area of farms and towns that's been controlled by these armed factions since 2012, and almost on a daily basis, various militants have launched mortars and held cannon missiles into Damascus. I personally witnessed 2 mortar attacks in the spring of 2014 when I was there. One of the attacks killed several people. So I've seen this with my own eyes, and the Syrian government has had its hands full up until now, but beginning about 7 or 8 weeks ago in early to mid-February, they began a campaign to finally get rid of the armed factions which have controlled this area. It went very quickly, actually, and over the course of about 5 weeks, they regained control of 90% of East Ghouta. And when they did that, they basically did some air attacks, and then they sent in their crack military team, the so-called Tiger Forces, and the rebels decided to negotiate. And so with the support of the Russian reconciliation team, they negotiated the peaceful withdrawal, the evacuation of the militants from this 90% of the area, and the militants were taken by buses, many thousands, to the north of Syria, and the big majority of civilians rushed into the government-controlled areas, and where they had set up recovery stations, and they had food and medical support and everything else. The last zone, the last town is Douma, which has been controlled for many years by a Saudi-funded group called the Army of Islam, Jaish al-Fatah, and they kind of refused to negotiate. And then they kind of stalled on the negotiation, and the Syrian army said, if you don't come to a reconciliation here, we are going to attack. And then on Saturday, it came out on video from the White Helmets and a couple of Western-funded medical groups that have some members and have basically agents there in Douma. The story that there was a chemical attack on Sunday, last Sunday. This was all over the major Western media, and then at the same time, Trump issued his tweet either late in the night Saturday or early Sunday. He issued his infamous tweet accusing Russia and Iran for being responsible for supporting the, quote, animal Assad and big price to pay. So things have gone on from there, but that's kind of the basic context. You have a video report, video claims. It looked like there were dead children. But where the video was taken, when it was taken, all of those details have not been confirmed. And we've got the President of the United States threatening to attack Syria and an ally of Russia, obviously. So the situation is very dangerous.
All right. Now, so, I mean, and this has been remarked all over the place from, everybody who doesn't have a TV news show, which is that this doesn't make any sense at all. As you're saying, this is the last little group here in this town. There's still, Al-Qaeda up in the Idlib province, as you talked about, and I think you say in the essay, this is part of the reason that this group, Jaish al-Islam, didn't want to negotiate, is because they didn't want to go to Idlib because they're enemies of Al-Qaeda too. And so they're kind of, desperate holdouts here, whatever. But the point being, Assad is on the verge of near total victory here. The Kurdish situation notwithstanding, but in terms of defeating ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the jihadist so-called revolution. So why in the world would he do this in a way when everyone knows that the chemical weapons are now the red line for the responsibility to protect doctrine, or however this Trump team calls it, to intervene in this war that we know they've been intervening in all along, but in a more overt way against the government there. And yet, on the other hand, the Syrian government is a government, so they do stupid, horrible things all the time, right? So why wouldn't they do this? I don't know. Do you completely dismiss it?
I think it's extremely unlikely that the Syrian government would do this. In fact, I don't think they've done. If all of the previous incidents where there have been accusations, the subsequent serious investigations point to the attacks being done by the armed militants as a provocation, trying to pressure the U.S. and NATO to intervene directly. So, I mean, if we think about going back to August of 2013, when the most famous and the biggest chemical weapons incident happened in the same area of eastern Ghouta, it was immediately the Syrian government was immediately accused of being responsible. But the subsequent investigations, the serious investigations, all pointed to it being done by the opposition with support from a foreign government. Seymour Hersh did a detailed report called the Red Line and the Rat Line, which talked about Turkey supplying the sarin to the militants to carry out the act, and with the explicit goal of provoking the U.S. to attack Syria and get involved and overthrow the Syrian government, which Turkey was wanting to do. The Erdogan government was wanting to do. So Seymour Hersh, Robert Perry, MIT professor Theodore Postel, all of these people, there's a website called whogouta.com. All of these investigations provide very convincing evidence that the attack in 2013 was not by the Syrian government. It was by the militants with the goal of pressuring the West to attack the Syrian government, just as they did in Libya in 2011.
Hey, don't forget Jeffrey Goldberg. The great journalist Jeffrey Goldberg, who he quotes Obama. This is how he knows, is the president himself told Jeffrey Goldberg, I guess making his excuse, but it must be true, he wouldn't have claimed this, that James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, came to him in, I don't know if it was August or September then, 2013, and told him, this is not a slam dunk.
Right.
Which is a reference to George Tenet, of course, telling President George W. Bush, I'll stand behind you and say that I'm telling you that this stuff is true for exactly. Iraq War II. And so...
Yeah, exactly. The thing that's been missing from the Goldberg piece and the subsequent, commentary about that, and Obama failed himself to make this important point. So he was very proud that he resisted what he called the Washington playbook, and that he did not attack Syria at the end of August 2013, early September 2013. But what was alluded to in that quote you gave was that the Syrian government was not responsible. That was the key thing,
right?
Because if you look at the media now, they all are based on the assumption that Assad's been doing this for years and years and nothing has happened, and Obama failed to enforce the red line, and now Trump's going to enforce the red line. All of that is premised on the assumption that the Assad government is guilty, when the serious investigations say, no, that's not true. It's been done by the armed militants with the specific goal of pressing the U.S. to get directly involved.
And then even the DNI himself refused to stand behind the accusations. So what does that say? And we know from the time from Phil Giraldi's reporting back then that there was a very good reason, a very simple reason, why Obama's government, why the White House released a government assessment blaming Assad at the time. And that was because they couldn't get the CIA to put one out saying that this is what they thought. The analysts and Giraldi said they were threatening to resign, that there's no way you're going to make us say that we know that Assad did this. I mean, that's for that to be happening at CIA headquarters in Langley. Can you imagine for them to just, fold their arms in front of their chest and say, forget you to Obama on that? Yeah. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Well, they were hung out to dry after the invasion of Iraq. And I think that was one of the lessons learned. And Ray McGovern, a former CIA, official, and actually a presidential briefer, and he's one of the co-founders of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. He's made that point that's been published at Consortium News especially. But we really need those people to step up now. It was great that they were pouring cold water on it, and they were refusing to go along with it in 2013. But
same thing a year ago, too. I mean, in fact, Giraldi came on the show April the 4th, the day of the attack last year, and said he has military and intelligence sources that say that this is not true, that the Russians bombed this building, that they had a drone surveilling it for at least 2 weeks beforehand, that they were on the phone with the Americans on the deconfliction line and let them know, hey, we're launching this attack against this building today where these guys are meeting, and that the military and intelligence sources in the field or nearby anyway in the region were saying that no, this is not true.
Yeah. Well, in my article,
and that was the day of too.
Yeah. It's amazing, and we need the honest and the good people in the CIA to step up and bring some real factual information to the table right now. Actually, going back to that incident that you're talking about, which is almost exactly a year ago, it was April of 2017. Again, Seymour Hersh did an investigation of that, and he also confirmed that it was not the incident was not carried out by the Syrians, and that the U.S. intelligence knew it. He couldn't get that published in the U.S. He couldn't get it published in the U.K. He had to go to Germany to get his investigation published. This is an indication of the sorry state of Western media, which went along with and promoted the lies leading to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and have basically failed to investigate all of the claims of the government and the the U.S. And Western claims around Syria.
Hey, you guys, get the audiobook of Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. Yes, it's me reading it. I wrote it, didn't I? That's at foolserrand.us. Check out the full archive of this show at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show, as well as scotthorton.org. And you can subscribe there on YouTube and for all the feeds, iTunes, Stitcher, etc. And help support the show at scotthorton.org/donate. For $50, you get a signed copy of the book Fool's Errand. For $100, you get a QR code silver commodity disc. You scan it with your phone, you get the instant spot price. It's the greatest invention in the history of currency. A little bit of old and a little bit of high tech there for you. And for any $200 donation to the show, you get a lifetime subscription to Listen and Think libertarian audiobooks, including my book, Fool's Errand, as well. And we accept all kinds of digital currencies, and most especially, of course, Zencash. That helps to sponsor this show. Patreon.com if you want to donate per interview. And YouTube, PayPal, if you want to do monthly subscription donations or single donations there. All that's available for you at scotthorton.org/donate. And also, hey, give me a good review on iTunes or Stitcher or what have you. If you read the book and you liked it, Amazon.com or Audible.com if you got the audiobook, and let them know. And you can invite me to give a speech to your group for a very reasonable price, especially you libertarians out there. Just let me know, Scott at scotthorton.org. Thanks. So back to this one. I'm sorry, because I was going to ask you more about Conchikun, but we should focus here on Douma. So now, tell me about, other than the fake accusations of sarin use by the Assad government, what about the numerous, I think, undisputed claims about ISIS and Al-Qaeda and these groups using chlorine in their attacks over the last years?
Right. Well, chlorine is not even on the prohibited list of chemicals, because it's used for treating water. It's used for all sorts of cleaning purposes, and it's not a prohibited chemical. So you can get access to chlorine pretty readily. And so it is possible to create some incidents. However, a lot of the claims about chlorine really began after the Syrian government eliminated its sarin, which was confirmed at the time in 2014. It was confirmed by the OPCW, which was awarded a Nobel Prize, largely on account of its involvement in that effort. The Syrian government worked with them and removed all of the stockpiles and all of the factories that could make chemical weapons. But after that, and the OPCW certified in 2014 that Syria had complied with that agreement and had followed through on that. Well, it was after that the stories about chlorine began, the claims by the quote-unquote rebels that they were under attack by chemical weapons and they were chlorine. Now, just one important side note here: how was the existing stockpile of the Syrian government, the chemical weapons, eliminated? They were eliminated by the U.S. on a U.S. vessel called the Marva Ray or something like that. It's a U.S. vessel that has the capability of destroying chemicals. Anyway, you can imagine that there were CIA and intelligence officers on there, and they could easily have set aside some of those Syrian chemicals and analyzed them. And so all of these claims that markers are found from the Syrian chemicals, those are not very persuasive, because the U.S. has had its hands on all of that material. So, that's one important thing, that just because a chemical is found to have a marker that matches with past Syrian chemicals doesn't really prove anything, because those chemicals were all turned over to the U.S.
Yeah. All right, now, so here's the problem. And yeah, no, that's an important point. Of course, this is part of why the neocons hate Vladimir Putin so much, is because he keeps cooperating with George W. Bush and Barack Obama and doing things to help them, like when the entire American population did not want to have a war with Syria over these lies in 2013. Putin stepped in, went around John Kerry, and said to Obama, look, let's do this deal. We'll get rid of these chemicals. We'll have your people verify it. It'll be good enough. And it was. And everybody breathed a sigh of relief. And then, Robert Perry, you mentioned him. I know you've done a lot of great writing for consortiumnews.com. His whole theory, or not his whole theory, but he said he thought a big part of the coup in Ukraine was revenge for Putin cooperating with the president in Syria, that this has got to be stopped, all this getting along and making agreements and stuff. And so let's overthrow the government of Ukraine twice in 10 years. So to make sure to nip that in the bud and not let that get. And of course, it was the Kagan family involved in all of this stuff. So on the Ukraine part there. So anyway, side point, but worth bringing up, that this is something that they just can't abide. And so, but this brings us to our real point, which is that by the time anybody hears this, we might already be dead, because I don't know exactly. I don't think Putin used the term red line, but they have said, listen, Syria is an ally of ours, and we insist you don't attack. I don't know exactly. What did they threaten? Did they say they will fight?
Well, what they said, and I went over this pretty carefully, and this is the statement of the chief of the general military staff of Russia, and this was a report from a month ago, and they said the U.S. plans to accuse Syria's government forces of using chemical weapons. And they said a provocation with the use of chemical agents in Syria is being prepared to justify a massive U.S. strike against Damascus government. I repeat, this story was from a month ago, March 13. And the general goes on to say that he goes on to issue a warning. In case there is a threat to the lives of our military, the Russian armed forces will take retaliatory measures both over the missiles and carriers that will use them. So they're basically saying that the locations, if it's an aircraft carrier, or if it's a land base of the U.S. that launches these missiles, they will be targets. So where does that take us? If the U.S. goes ahead and does this and attacks the Damascus government in Damascus, and Russians are there, he said this, they're staying there alongside the Syrians, they're killed. They've said they will attack the source of those missiles. Where does that take us?
Yeah, man, it's just crazy. We're stuck in this thing, right? Where because of George W. Bush and Iraq War II, they're forever trying to make up for the fact that they empowered Iran in Iraq. And then all they end up doing is empowering Iran more, and while empowering Al-Qaeda more at the same time, too. The Americans never benefit, but the American people's actual enemies, Al-Qaeda, and the American empire's enemies, the Iranians, they continue to benefit time and again after all these interventions over there. And then, but now, they're in a panic. If you read what they're writing I was just reading this thing in the Jerusalem Post today, which is actually a couple months old, but, saying, my God, the Shiite crescent is so much more powerful than it used to be. For some reason, somehow, history began yesterday, and now we just cannot abide having the IRGC and the Iranian special forces types and Hezbollah empowered on our northern border in Syria now, the way it is. And never mind how it got that way, but they're like at DEFCON 1 over this. That we're going to have to, as John Bolton says, if we're not overthrowing Assad, we might as well just go ahead and overthrow the government in Tehran. Then it doesn't matter if Assad is allied to Tehran or not, because there are puppets from now on kind of attitude. Like, they have really brought this thing to a head in a way that, even though you and I don't care, about the Shiite crescent, for them, this is absolutely intolerable, even though they're the ones who created the whole thing in the first place.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. They created this, and to my perspective, the answer is you go back to the outcome of World War II, which was international law, the UN Charter, that it's a violation of both for one state to attack another one, either through its own forces or through a proxy army. And Israel and Saudi Arabia can, proceed with their governments and they can do whatever they're doing. They don't have the right, in cahoots with the United States, to say that they're the sole, governments that dictate the area. They basically destroyed Iraq. They destroyed Libya, which is still in chaos today. The Afghanistan conflict goes on. The U.S. is increasing the number of troops there. They have tried to destroy Syria, but Syria has clung on. It's continued. It's a secular government. It's a semi-socialist government. They feel very strongly that they are not just one ethnicity. There's many different ethnicities. There's many different religions in Syria. They respect them all, and that's what they're fighting for. And that's what we should be fighting for as well. Instead, the U.S. government and our tax dollars are going to fund the most reactionary, sectarian, religiously biased fanatics, really, and mercenaries. And so this is, are we going to start World War III over this?
All right, you all. Here's who sponsors this show. The great Mike Swanson in his book, The War State, about the rise of the military-industrial complex in this country after World War II and the Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy administrations. A very important read, The War State, and also get his great investment advice and market analysis all at wallstreetwindow.com. The great Mike Swanson, wallstreetwindow.com. Zencash at zensystem.io to learn all about this great new digital currency. It's also an encrypted messaging app and document delivery device and all kinds of great stuff there. Learn all about it at zensystem.io. And, of course, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage, Inc. They take care of your gold, silver, platinum, palladium, and any precious metals that you need to get. And if you buy with Bitcoin, they charge no premium at all. That's rrbi.co, rrbi.co for Roberts & Roberts Brokerage, Inc. And libertystickers.com for anti-government propaganda for the back of your truck. I promise we got a new website coming any day now here. I mean, it's done. It's just got to be plugged in. And Tom Woods Liberty Classroom, if you want to learn a bunch of stuff, click the link on my page at scotthorton.org and learn from Tom Woods, and I'll get a kickback. And check this out. If you want a new 2018 model website, then go to expanddesigns.com and expanddesigns.com/Scott. And you'll save $500. And, we don't have to back the Assad government. It was wrong when Bill Clinton and George W. Bush contracted with Assad to torture people for the U.S. We shouldn't do that. That's what part of what, supporting Egypt, supporting Saudi, making deals like this with Assad. I don't know, it's not like the Assad regime was ever really the puppets of the Americans, but they cooperated with Iraq War I. And, they've been in power since the Nixon years, the father and then the son. And we didn't have that big of a problem with them before. And so, but yeah, we don't have to back them up, but to support the Al-Qaeda guys against them, it's just crazy. And I don't have to tell you, but I do have to tell everybody listening, for those who are young and those who maybe were wrong then or weren't paying attention then, that we've known since the very beginning, since 2011, the reports came in, Bandar is sending jihadist terrorists from Saudi to Syria. That was in 2011. You know, Phil Giraldi reported about Obama's new finding, authorizing the CIA to step up covert action in Syria. We had Eric Margolis said he went to France and talked to special forces and intelligence guys there, said they're already on the ground there in Syria organizing the rebellion. And we knew from the beginning, and it was in McClatchy newspapers from the very beginning, that their sources at the State Department said that, it's Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They've come across the border, and they're leading this fight. And this is before the whole thing even freaking really got started, comparatively, you know, in 2011, at the very beginning. We've known that this thing was led by these very worst of the suicide bombers.
Right. Yeah, that's the sad thing. And the U.S., actually, the U.S. and the U.K. have used sectarian fanatics, have used a reactionary element of the Muslim Brotherhood, going back to the 1940s. There's a good book by Robert Dreyfus called
I was just going to say that.
Devil's Game.
Devil's Game.
Game.
How the U.S. helped to unleash fundamentalist Islam. Yeah, them and the Brits.
Exactly. And so there's a long history of this. But that's that's precisely what's happened to Syria, and that's what Syrians are fighting for. Going back to your point about Assad, whether it's Assad or Maduro in Venezuela or Putin in Russia, I mean, we can have our opinions, but the core principle is that it's for the people in those countries to determine their leader. It's also for them to overthrow their leader if they don't like him, to campaign against him, or to support him. It's not the right of Americans to dictate, who should be leading Syria. It's for the Syrian people.
Right. Well, and what's insane about this is that because of the consequences of supporting the jihad in Syria this whole time, it ended up in leading to the rise of the Islamic State, which didn't just carve off a piece of eastern Syria. I mean, guess what? The group called itself the Islamic State of Iraq back in 2006. They said what they were about. And so they conquered all of western Iraq. So then we had to fight Iraq War III from 2014 through 17 to roust them back out again. But that puts us on both sides of the same war where, we hate Assad so much because he's killing these wonderful jihadist heroes. Well, what about a body? A body is just the Assad of Iraq. The only problem is that it's the USA that put him in there. So when he kills tens of thousands of people in Mosul with American help, that's perfectly cool. Even though it's never mind the double standard on the civilian casualties. But how about just the double standard on how come we're fighting for Hezbollah's side in Iraq if that's the root of all evil in Syria then? Why not keep back in the Islamic State? Why not go ahead and openly declare, yes, us and Saudi and Turkey and Qatar and Israel, we support the caliphate to limit the power of Iran and keep it that way.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess my core belief is that we need international law. We need due process. We need a multilateral world where independence is where countries can chart their own paths, can determine their own leadership, whether they want to be capitalist, communist, socialist, whatever, libertarian. I mean, whatever. It's up to the people of each country to determine.
Right.
And I think what's the big picture here is the conflict in Syria is a focal point of a conflict over the world. Is the world going to be run by the United States? Is it going to be a unipolar world with the U.S. as the unquestioned, unchallenged economic, military, political determining force? That certainly runs against what was established after World War II. And I think we need to get back to that. And that's really what's at stake here. Can China and Russia, can they support other governments around the world, even if the United States doesn't like it? Does the United States have the right to overthrow the government of Syria? Does Israel have the right to create mayhem and support mayhem in Syria because they don't like Iran? These are the kind of the core questions, and
it's really kind of the core contradiction of the UN and all this international law at its core, though, isn't it? That without the USA as the world army to enforce the world law, then what is it?
That's right. And sadly, certain departments, certain agencies, certain people at the United Nations are not independent. Sadly, they have become tools of the United States and U.S. policy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, maybe that's the way it has to be as long as you have such a thing. In other words, as you say, the UN Charter says all these states are sovereign, but it's America says, yeah, because it's our job to keep them all from fighting, and then therefore wages all these wars in the name of enforcing that very world order.
Right,
right. So,
well, it's sad now. We've got an ambassador of the United States at the United Nations who just says, flat out, if the Security Council isn't going to act, then we're going to act alone, which is just in flat out violation.
Yeah.
Under international law, you're not allowed to attack another country unless, except in self-defense or with the authorization of the UN Security Council.
Yep.
So since the United States was never taken to court, it was never shown that their invasion of Iraq was a clear violation of international law. That has seen the dissent. When international law can be violated with impunity by one government, in this case the United States and its main allies, it undermines the credibility, and nobody even thinks about it anymore, sadly.
Right. Well, and that's the whole thing, right, is, for right-wing patriots out there, we shouldn't have to give in to international law as though it's something being enforced on us. It's the American government that has created this whole thing, and America, being a limited constitutional republic, a commercial republic, is perfectly consistent with leaving the rest of the world the hell alone, which happens to be the international law anyway, right? So that's
exactly
the whole thing of it. If it's America first, then we don't need the UN to tell us to be unilaterally at peace. That's supposed to be up to us, and that's exactly what we need to have as our policy,
Right, exactly. Now, I mean, a lot of people around the world may not like Donald Trump, but it's not for them to decide. It's for the American people to elect or remove Donald Trump.
Right. Boy, if you think about if all of America's pretexts for war were turned around and used against us by the rest of the world, would we be in trouble? All right.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, thanks again for coming on the show. Great work.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Scott.
Really appreciate it.
Care.
All right, you guys, that is Rick Sterling, and he's an investigative journalist, and he wrote this article. It's up at antiwar.com, Taking the World to the Brink of Annihilation. And I'm Scott Horton. Check out all the stuff at scotthorton.org, libertarianinstitute.org, antiwar.com, foolserrand.us for my book, and now available in audiobook as well. Everybody seems to really like it. foolserrand.us for my book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. And follow me on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. Thanks.